Well, now we have a lot of knowledge collected up here. So please pose your questions, and you will be richly answered, I suppose. Yes, please.
I'm a child psychiatrist, Lars Westerström. I wonder, how common do you think ME/CFS is among the child population?
We can't hear. Take the microphone there, the mobile one.
I'm Lars Westerström, child psychiatrist. How common do you think ME/CFS is in the child population? How many shall we look for?
In the population probability of MFs in the Swedish population, I have no idea. Do we have any?
Since we speak about figures about 0.1 to 0.5% in the...
0 point?
Yeah, in the U.S., it's considered about 1/10 of the frequency of adults. That's the rough estimate.
Okay, then, Jonas.
Just a general comment. I think it's a shame that we don't know the frequency of this disease in Sweden. I mean, we have all these fantastic diagnostic abilities and registries, but no one is measuring how common it is. And we don't know, we can't follow over time either, because nobody is collecting these data and processing these available data.
Well, I think it's possible to find out. It has a diagnostic number now, isn't it? So we should be able to easily find out how many cases there are.
93.3, I heard.
Yes. So, I mean, you just have to go home and find out. I don't think it should be difficult.
But I think it has been a problem. There's different diagnostic criteria have been used over time and different in different countries. And there's not been a single medical specialty that ME/CFS belongs to. It's a neurological disease according to ICD, but it's not clear that it should be investigated in a neurology clinic. So I think there needs to be a kind of development in this area. So you develop these standardized ways to investigate suspected ME and how to do it and which criteria to use, and that's why I think few doctors in Sweden have used this diagnosis until maybe I think it's changing now, but it is a process. That's why you can't look back into statistics.
Well, I guess there is no proper surrogate marker, isn't it, which would make a definite diagnosis. So that's why it's a bit fluid. Please.
Well, I'd like to comment that in the U.S. also, we really don't know the frequency. The IOM report used the number 850,000 to 2.5 million, because we really don't know. And one reason they had the clinical diagnostic criteria that they do, a very simple clinical diagnostic criteria with the idea that physicians who are not specialists should be able to diagnose the illness. The estimate in the IOM report was that 80% of patients in the U.S. are not diagnosed who actually have ME/CFS. So we really don't know, and it'd be very important to know, because then you can calculate the economic impact and then campaign for more funds. So I think it's important in every country to know how many people have it, because that gets the attention of government officials, and who then become worried about how much money is being lost by people having to spend all day at home.
Is there any knowledge about geographic variations? I mean, in continents and countries, is there among black people and Asian people?
It's not really known, but there was an interesting study done by Lenny Jason's group indicating that although most of the patients who visit clinics are well off, usually financially, that when he did a phone survey, he found actually that the underserved population of people who are not financially well off actually had equal or higher frequency of the disease. And of course, you know, we have a terrible healthcare system in the US that's getting worse as a result of recent events, political events. But so this is a serious issue, that there are a lot of people who have the disease who are probably homeless. I've talked to a number of people who think that some of our homeless problem is caused by people being told they have depression or they've lost their house and lost their home because of being ill. In fact, some of those patients who went to see Betsy Keller were desperate because without disability insurance proving that they were ill, they were in fact going to be on the street. So.
You reported that the profile of the gut flora could, by 80% probability, diagnose this, isn't it? That's as close as a good surrogate marker as I've heard so far.
Right. The Lipkin group also found that with their analysis also that they could diagnose over 80% that way. But it's not an easy test. It's not something you could just order up. It's really it's a research test right now, although there are more and more companies that are offering to tell you about your microbiome. No one has taken those company tests and seen if they can distinguish ME/CFS from healthy people.
Question?
Okay, please.
Yeah,
Yes.
so going back to the introductory speech about unfair, unequal treatment in healthcare and the desire from our politicians to, I guess, recognize this disease, which I think is hard to prove is actually a disease for individual patients. My question is, maybe looking to the Swedish situation, what people have actually been diagnosed with having this as a disease and have been given insurance protection? And if so, what tests have been used to actually prove that they are ill? And a follow-up question would be, if you look across all your analytic techniques and methods, what would be the best combination to actually prove to the healthcare system that people are sick?
Yeah, I can, from Swedish perspective, it's a big problem. And now I think with the insurance agencies and so on, it's not only for ME patients, but they have some increasing demands on that can put a lot of problem also for other neurological diseases, for example. So especially with the patients, for example, with other type of cognitive problems, which are not easily visible from the outside. So it's not an easy question to answer. There is no like standard test you could, but for us it's very important. We work in a team with occupational therapists, physical therapists, and do this individual assessment, both to help the patient, of course, that's the main reason, but also to get a good basis for example, insurance agencies and so on.
When it comes to, I'm not sure if this is working, yeah. When it comes to analytical techniques, I'm not really there yet to be able to say exactly what technique will be the final result or final market for these biomarkers. But I think that still we need to keep testing a few different technologies in combination to make sure that we don't miss out on something very important. And I think, combining imaging with selected biomarker screening or measurements is going to give at least a biochemical proof for that something is going on and something is disturbed. So I think that is a strong argument in this discussion with politicians and with healthcare system and so on.
And just a simple thing as riding the bike 2 days in a row rather than just one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're actually hoping to put ourselves out of business with regard to that 2-day test because it does cause relapse among the patients. So although our center is actually, every experiment that we're doing is going to require that 2-day test, We're actually hoping that we'll be able to use that to identify biomarkers so that people won't have to do that test. It's a lot to ask someone to do, and it's not a simple test either.
Yeah.
And the other problem is that about a third of the people aren't positive on that test who are ill. So while if you are positive as showing that you have an abnormal response to exercise, you could still have ME/CFS and not show an abnormal response on that test.
Yeah, so that's our main goal is not because there will always, I mean, there's a long way for biomarker development to where it shows differences on the group level and you understand about the pathology. And for example, in Alzheimer's disease, there are a lot of these known findings, but we're still not there. The diagnosis is still mainly clinical and you use the biomarkers to exclude other diseases. So it's important, I think, that the clinical diagnostic criteria and a thorough medical workup to exclude other causes and for example, the Canadian criteria or the IOM criteria, that should be enough. And then if you describe the patient disability, that should be, and you get a clear diagnosis. You shouldn't need any biological test, for example, for insurance purposes. It's not relevant, the blood level of a protein when you look at it. That's the daily function is what's relevant for example, for insurance purposes.
Yes, please. Over there. Do you have a microphone? Microphone, you get there.
Yes, I have a question about possible treatment for this chronic cell danger response. There is this old drug called Suramine. Do you think, Jonas, it would be something to try in the future?
Yes, I've been trying to figure out a bit around that, and it's something I would like to see if we could follow up on. It's a very difficult situation right now because the drug is not available as it is.
What's the name of the drug again?
Suramine.
Suramine, okay.
It's a biotropic medicine.
It has been used against sleeping sickness, a very poisonous drug, really. Mm. Well, okay. Please. I have to run with it.
I was wondering, I'm talking to you now, do you have the means to help the ME patients to confront the insurance companies and so on? My daughter and me are just preparing for this daunting experience. So I know you're understaffed, so how can you help the patients? Is it enough to have a diagnosis, or in your experience, what is needed?
And that's not different for ME patients now in Sweden and other diagnoses. The important thing is you need to have a good from the healthcare, and also that's why it's important for us with the occupational therapists, physical therapists, and psychologists, and so on. You need a good description of the functional impairment and also activity impairment by these kind of professions. And that's the key. And you should could be able to get it in the primary care setting, for example, if you have knowledge about the ME disease.
Yes, but my question was, as my daughter is a patient at Sköndal, do you have the means? I know you've been understaffed and you closed down the telephone and everything. So is that something you can supply for your patients? That was my question.
Yes, of course.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'll hold you to that.
Yeah.
I actually have a comment. A lot of young patients have POTS, which is postural orthostatic intolerance. So, and you look like you have it actually. And there's an objective test for that, which is the tilt table test, which I don't know about here, but in the US, if you're diagnosed as positive on the tilt table test as having POTS or other orthostatic intolerance, that can establish disability also. And that can be useful for school, establishing disability in the school.
And you over there first?
Yes, coming back to the question of how frequent is the ME out in the general population, then I think we have to do as you've done in New York, and that is to really inform the physicians about how to diagnose by clinical means, at least to the general practitioner, how he should set the diagnosis. Today, the general physicians don't know anything about this diagnosis. So it's a basic education to all those out in the society, in the healthcare system. They have to be informed frequently about this diagnosis so that they start to recognize what signs and what sort of definition there is, and not just to neglect the patient because all samples and analysis are normal. You agree? Hopefully.
Yeah, it's a good point, and we are involved. I think the Stockholm County Council has been very advanced in this respect. There is on internet there is a guide for mainly general practitioners how to diagnose, investigate, and refer different type of diagnosis. And there is a section on ME/CFS that we have been involved in writing, which is quite up to date, very similar, I think, to this American guidelines, basically, and the primer from the International ME/CFS Foundation. And Anders Ström, one of my colleagues sitting here, he's mainly involved in their updating now in Stockholm County Council the so-called ward program. It's more extensive, maybe a bit more authoritative text about how to investigate and care for ME patient and diagnosis and so on. So it's on the way, I think. It's a very important, like you said, it's a very important question. Because we believe many patients, if they have a GP, for example, that knows something about ME, and you get an early diagnosis, you can get very concrete help at an early stage. It's very beneficial for the patients, instead to spend years not being believed and around in the...
Okay, please.
I have an observation about the diagnostic procedure. Some of my colleagues in child clinics seem to be skeptical about the diagnosis, although they should be the experts. So I find I am more sort of looking for ME than they are. And I think that is because we are in child psychiatry, we are used to criteria-based diagnosis, and they want objective signs, and this is quite problematic. So I really think it would be beneficial for these patients to have objective means to establish a diagnosis. So I'm really looking forward to that, but I agree that one should be able to make the diagnosis on the criteria basis. But then, comparing to the ADHD epidemiology, 30, 40 years ago, I had sort of 10 cases, and now I have 200, 300, 400 to deal with. So, and it's very different how many ADHD cases there are in different parts of Sweden. It could vary from 2% of the boy population to 12% being medicated by amphetamine or the likes. So I think the criteria should be very strict and worked through, and it's a big job to do there. So I hope for that.
Yes, please. The lady there behind.
I'm coming back to this research group in Gothenburg, Sweden, that is now out of business. In 1972, they published a paper on injections of a placebo-controlled trial with injections of B12 to patients that had, they said, pathological fatigue, not really ME. Is there? So my question is there a continuous spectrum from ME and getting less and less and less tired, and then you're normal. So this is a scale of fatigue.
I can, maybe because that's why I don't like the word fatigue and chronic fatigue syndrome, because it misleads you. Because if you work some time and meet some ME patients, it's a very clear clinical picture, and it's the fatigability, the PEM, that stands out. And even though, like for instance, traumatic brain injury patients can have a mental fatigability that's somewhat similar, the physical fatigability you see in ME is quite distinct and has nothing to do with feeling fatigued. Basically, and feeling sleepy, or if I have sleep apnea, it's not. I don't know.
A lot of patients will tell you that the fatigue isn't their worst symptom, that they have either pain or cognitive difficulties. They will complain more about. And, some patients will tell you that they can deal with the fatigue if they could only think, or so. That's why a lot of us hate the name chronic fatigue syndrome, because it really misleads people to have a different concept of the disease than it actually is.
Yes, please.
Okay, so my name is Susan and I'm a general pediatrician, and a lot of us are very up to date with this diagnosis, but it's a very difficult, serious and hard diagnosis to set to people or to give to people, and I have quite a few of this patient group in my practice, and my question is regarding treatment in Germany. I have a lot of people going there for a lot of money, trying to get some kind of help with different immunotherapy, antibiotics, malaria medication, etc. Could you say something about this? Is it something we should talk about with the patient, or should we tell them no, or is it just up to oneself to decide?
Anyone? I don't know anything.
Maybe Jonas can say. I think that's a problem. In Sweden, it's not so big problem with labs and so on, but when we get questions like that, we talk to Jonas or someone who is expert on, because labs should be certified, and so that's not our expertise, of course, but we rely on our. So maybe Jonas, you can say something more about these labs, and I think also in the US there are a lot of private labs where you pay, and I don't know about this normal material and so on. So that's different.
Well, I've been in contact with labs in Germany, and they sell results. So, and then you don't get that much help in interpreting the results. Some of the methods that are used, for example, for Borrelia, are very sensitive and have a relatively low specificity. So it creates a lot of trouble. And according to my opinion is that we should improve the methods that we have in Sweden and validate them as much as possible. That's the only way one can do with respect to the labs. Then doctors, some of them are very good, know very well what they are doing in Germany, and but some are just unscrupulous and treat patients with high doses of antibiotics for several years, for example, and really not knowing what they are doing.
I think the therapy I think you're talking about is the immunosorption therapy. You used to use it before kidney transplant, so you get rid of all the antibodies from the sera. And I've heard about that one. But with Rituximab, a lot of patients desperate for rituximab, but we would really strongly advise against rituximab unless you've got an actual reason to give it, like you've found an autoantibody, for example. At least that will give you a basis for it. But outside a trial situation, all of these techniques are not proved, and they can be, as you say, really dangerous. So,
like to add something. I'm Kerstin Heiling, chair of the Swedish RME Association, talking about children, diagnosing children. Has just recently been published a pediatric primer for ME/CFS. I haven't got the link. I didn't bring it. Perhaps someone else has it. But try to find it on the net. Pediatric primer of ME/CFS. And it's a lot of pediatricians, very well known and with long experience of ME/CFS, who has written this. We haven't got it yet on the website of RME. We're reading it to decide about to put it on the website. But I think that's really important because it's different. Diagnosing children is different from diagnosing adults.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's it.
Please, yes. This man has not posed any questions before.
Hello. I have a question about SSRI and SNRI. If you have seen any, I'm a patient, and as many of us, we've been diagnosed with depression first, which I hadn't, but that's what they told me for years. And they gave me SSRI and SNRI, and I got so much worse, and haven't really recovered after stopping with that. Have any of you seen any correlation with the treatment of that with ME, and if any other patients has gotten worse with that?
Your experience.
I'm not a physician, so I don't have experience with that. But one thing that's well known is that ME patients are super sensitive to drugs. And so, a dose that you were taking that might be appropriate for someone who has depression might have made you much worse because of your super sensitivity to that drug. So, but I don't have any data on that.
But as we said in the hallway there, if you have serious symptoms of ME, I mean, it must be normal to be depressed, isn't it? Depression must be a normal function of this disease.
No.
Not? Not?
No, there are many patients who've been sick for years who are not depressed, and which is actually very surprising. And these are very resilient patients. Now, some patients do have comorbid depression, but we normally exclude those from our studies. And it's not easy to. It's quite easy to find patients who do not have depression. And a physician friend of mine told me that it was very easy for him to tell the difference between depression and ME/CFS. He asked the depressed person, what do you want to, what if you got well tomorrow, what would you do? And they can't think of anything. You ask an ME patient what they would do tomorrow if they were well, and they have 10 things immediately that they want to go do. So it's very striking.
Oh, that's very hopeful, that you can be happy with that, such a serious disease. This is amazing, to say the least.
In my case, it was, they told me that I didn't feel depressed, but they told me that because I was tired and having pain, that was depression. That's even though I didn't feel it mentally or anything, I was quite happy at the time.
Oh, okay, that's more than I am. Okay.
I think.
All right, more. That was your. Oh, please.
Well, thank you. My name is Stora Eriksson from Umeå, Sweden. I have a question and a reflection. You mentioned, I think it was Jonas mentioned that in the ME there is disturbances in the acetylcholic system, and my reflection is, wouldn't it be perhaps a clinical trial done on acetylcholinesterase inhibitors, which has been showing a fairly good effect in other brain lesions, for example, Alzheimer's disease, mainly as a stabilizing agent, which means that they can, at least if you look at Alzheimer's patients and look at Lewy body patients, they tolerate stress much better when they are treated with these drugs. And my reflection is, shouldn't it also be done in ME?
Perhaps Per can...
That's
okay.
interesting. I'm not sure if there has been any trials on that with acetylcholine esterase inhibitors, for instance.
There was one study, I think it was discontinued, but there was a study out from the infection clinic at Huddinge with a drug company, with, I think it was Rivastigmin or something, that did a trial on ME CFS. In the 90s.
They did not succeed, or
no, I don't. I believe they didn't succeed, but that was based on CDC criteria. It was different. It's a difference today, I think.
And,
I think it's very important to be clear about what you are measuring, because of the main effect is on the stabilizing, not improving, for example, the function in general, much on reducing the confusional components. So if it is measured, I think it would be very interesting to see.
Exactly, yeah. And what I presented in our study is actually an effect where we are potentially blocking the receptors for acetylcholine. So that's another part of the whole story.
Okay,
around the world, and many of them feel that they are not listened to or heard or seen, and you have these organizations who are trying to identify how to diagnose and cure it. Have there been any thoughts to some kind of crowdfunding or some way to get people to pay rather than to pay a German clinicians that give the wrong treatment, to pay to the real good research and come up with treatments? Because there must be hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people who could all pay a little bit, all the relatives of people who are sick, if there was a kind of movement around this, to get it out in the open a little bit.
I suggest donating to RME.
Perhaps the chairman of the Swedish ME.
Oh, sorry, I was actually not paying attention since I was fetching the microphone, sorry. Mm. It's actually happening. There have been some crowdfunding events, and we have made at least one in Sweden, where we have tried on, especially on social media, to try raise research funds, and it has actually proved to be a bit successful. So. Yeah, so I think this year we have actually managed to get a few more dollars in that way. But there are also discussions on making some kind of global crowdfunding or social media action to raise both the awareness and the finding worldwide. The problem is you have a lot of different associations, so you need to in some way collaborate between all the patient organizations.
Yeah, yeah. RME is collaborating with the Open Medicine Foundation mainly, and we've been really successful. I think 2 weeks ago, we sent 100,000 Swedish crowns to the OMF Foundation to be furthered to our Swedish researchers. And last year, I think we have altogether, with these 100,000 crowns, sent 250,000 crowns to the OMF, as our Swedish researchers want to be independent of our organization. So that's why we send it over the ocean and then back again. But that's been, I'm amazed and impressed by the willingness of members, carers, and others to donate. And that, of course, will continue.
And maybe I can comment on that also. We are, as Swedish researchers, very grateful for the help we get, of course, for supporting the research. But it's also very important, as Kerstin stressed, that we are independent and that there is an external review board who looks to the applications, we or others send in for getting research funding. So I think that's a very good system that we are following.
Yeah, at least the Swedish Medical Research Council, they are very much positive to research in this area. What's lacking is not money, it's new ideas. This is what's most lacking, as is true for most science.
Charlotta Löfberg, I'm a member of the board of the Stockholm ME Foundation. And just a comment about clinical studies. You will need really, really lots of money. They are very, very expensive. It's tens of millions of Swedish krona for a simple, small study. So even though we are quite, or have been successful in fundraising this summer, it's still not even, it's just so far away. And I don't think a lot of people are aware of how much it costs. Yeah, just that.
Okay, we are approaching the end of the day. Any more questions? And any of the panel participants that wants to have a concluding remark? Okay, one more, okay.
Yeah. Many years ago, I was offered cannabis for pain, neurological pain, and I was shocked at that time because it was not very much spoken about that. And it is supposed to say, create new pathways between nerve cells, something like that. And nowadays you can buy it in health food stores, and of course the toxic part is removed, so it does not have that effect like during the time when it was smoked. But it's common also in the States, I have heard, and it's very popular among my friends, and they get less pain, and also they sleep better. Do you have any comments about that, although it is not, there is no research?
I have no information about that. You know, I really don't know anything about that, but it wouldn't surprise me if it would help people with pain. But I've actually never seen a study or even had anecdotal evidence about people's response in the U.S. Since in many states it is easy to obtain, but in many states it's not.
Would you advocate a therapeutic trial with cannabis in this disease?
I think that might be difficult to fund in our current political situation.
Yes. But anyone is free to try, of course, on its own. Okay, last question then. I hope it's an excellent one.
Okay, let's see. My name is Jenny Weber. I have a 16-year-old girl at home with ME. We had lots of problems for a while, and now recently again. She faints, she had severe cramp, and problem with breathing. Is it something you recognize? It's not epilepsy, it's not heart failure. She had a high pulse in rest and low blood pressure. Anybody?
It's not a question, you just want to have a comment on that, those symptoms.
Yes, if anybody can relate to that, or do have treatment, something that helps.
Per, can you?
Of course, it's very difficult to say. Like you said, the important thing, the first step is, of course, like I said, to rule out if there is something else like epilepsy or things like that. But to some degree, you have muscular, like cramps and fainting, like the POTS syndrome and so on. But the most important thing to get is thorough medical investigations. You can feel it. So it's very hard to give some further advice on the.
Yeah, and it's really done that it's not epilepsy. She done everything, so they don't know what it is.
Has she had a tilt table test?
No, that's not done.
So that would tell whether it's orthostatic intolerance.
Yes.
Because that can cause fainting. So that's
Yes.
something you could try to have that test.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, then I wish to thank all the panel participants, and I think we can be hopeful here. A lot of development is going on, and I think the discussion of this is a real disease or not is dead now, isn't it? We know that this is a new somatic entity, and it's up to us and you and perhaps the next generation to find out what causes it, or if there are many things to cause it, and if we can interfere with that in the future. I'm sure we will be able to. I may not survive to experience it, but some of you may survive to do it. Thank you very much for this afternoon. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Mr. Moderator Sven from the patient organization. You have done an excellent job today, keeping everyone on time. And the patient organization would also like to thank the lecturers, of course, and the audience for coming here. And we hope to see you. Yep, don't forget the evaluation form so we can make an even better conference next year. See you later.